Still good. Okay, let's see. There. Okay. Are you ready? We're right at 6 o'clock, so we'll start you on time. You are 3. Low signal, but don't worry about it. That's YouTube. 3, 2.
The space station crew is safe following a debris event. Our recently returned Crew 2 astronauts discussed their mission and what our Crew 1 astronauts did in Washington.
Business, that's what we do. KUAW, we're live. That's right. This is Monday, November 29th. This month is done. We just started, now it's over. So yeah, we're here at the W.B. Du Bois Learning Center, brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association. Got Baba G here with me on the soundboard, holding up and keeping it down, always on KUAW. I'm Dolo Solo today. Have a show I'm going to be getting into. Is called Holy Day Paradigmatics. And we're going to be talking about some stuff. That's right, some stuff. But of course, shifting paradigms, we're all about stimulating critical thought in order to realistically redefine our narrative and positively reshape our reality through dialogue with self-determination. Like I said, today we are going to be discussing Holy Day Paradigmatics. For many people in the world, today is actually going into the second day of what is known as the Festival of Hanukkah. And so this is a festival, I'll talk about it briefly, but it is a day that is a day of remembrance, and it has a lot to do with the many being given over to the few, and the strong being delivered into the hands of the weak, and the corrupt being turned over to the pure in heart, right? And the guilty being put into the hands of the innocent. So this is a very powerful day, 8-day festival, as a matter of fact, that commemorates the victory of the nation of Israel against the empire of the Grecians, known also as the Seleucids and Antiochus Epiphanes, and I'll get into that a little more, and we'll talk about that as relates to a bunch of the things that we're going to be dealing with as relates to holidays and holy days. What are the differences? And we'll get into that. And so I want to kind of paint the picture initially with a passage from the prophet Daniel. Daniel goes on to speak about this empire that is intent on making some changes, some pretty serious changes to the system of worship that was given to the nation of Israel, which gave the world the Bible. So this is a Hebrew people, ethnically speaking, and Israel is their nationality, being an Israelite. And they're divided into 12 tribes, but they all had one vision. They all had one spirit. They all had one mind. When you read the scriptures, that is, and this goes across generations, and they dealt with a culture as was typified in their kingdom that they were intent on establishing on earth as it was in heaven. And so the prophet Daniel speaks of 4 beasts, and we've gone over this before, and these beasts are governmental entities. They were kingdoms at the time. Of course, they've morphed and to become different types of government, but through history, when you look at history and you look at the succession of these empires that arose, particularly starting with the empire of Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar, that was defeated by the Persian, the Medo-Persian Empire, which was led by a king by the name of Darius, and eventually was given over to a king by the name of Koresh or Cyrus. That empire was defeated by the Grecian Empire led by Alexander of Macedonia. And then that went into the Empire of Rome, which was headed by a Caesar by the name of Tiberius. And so Daniel wants to bring forth this unfolding prophetic event that is captured for our day and time under the empire of the 4th beast, which is the Roman Empire, which lives today, believe it or not. But in the 7th chapter of Daniel, just kind of want to capture this so that we can understand where we are in time and what is taking place, because these holy days, or holidays some call them, are all related to time. And time is so imperative to understand as relates to whose time that we're on. Who are we observing in terms of what laws are we observing, and who are we serving, in the matter of fact, when it comes to that. But Daniel writes in the 7th chapter of his book, in the 23rd to the 25th chapter, he says that the fourth beast is the fourth kingdom on earth, which is different from all other kingdoms, and it devours, and the path to perdition. Okay, so the blueprint of redemption and the path to perdition. And so, diving into this right away, I want to look at what the definition of holiday is. Okay, it is a noun. In its noun tense, a holiday is a day fixed by law or custom on which ordinary business is suspended in commemoration of some event or in honor of some person. Any day of exemption from work distinguished from the working day. It is a time period of exemption from any requirement, duty, assessment, etc. So in a sense, it is a Sabbath. It can be considered a Sabbath, even though it's probably not thought of as a Sabbath. But it is a day in which, business as usual is suspended. So that's what a holy day is considered as a noun. As an adjective, it's related to a festival, or being festive, or having some joyous occasion which is suitable for a holiday. Okay, so it relates to that spirit of being festive. And then lastly, as a verb, and specifically related, chiefly it says, to a British term, it means to vacation. So go and vacate. Okay? So those are the definitions of what a holiday is. Okay? But in the Hebrew, you have the word holy day, which are known in the Hebrew tongue as moedim. Okay, moedim. And the Hebrew word is translated as a festival or an appointed time. And it is a word that is key to particularly Sabbatarians' observances and their arguments. Okay, moedim, the Hebrew word from the singular moed, which is a plural noun, occurs for the first time in the passage that you see in Genesis, particularly 1. Okay, where it talks about these seasons. Okay, these appointed times, these moed. Okay, translators often refer to it as seasons or times. Properly, it denotes appointed seasons or appointed times, referring to the festivals of Elohim. Okay, his feast days, which are again found in Leviticus 23. We'll kind of just peruse through that a little bit. Today, we generally call these festivals by the term holy days. Okay. Also, looking at Genesis 1:14, it's correctly concluded that the sun, and particularly the moon, play a key role in establishing these seasons. So, interestingly, these memorials are related to occasions in the calendar year as relates to like harvest festivals, but also events during these seasons as well. And we'll talk about those as we close, just to really draw that out more. But they're also related to seasons, okay? And they establish the seasons. And most especially the appointed feast days, which are the holy days of Elohim. The word does not solely mean a festive time or a season of celebration. Some of them are very solemn occasions, such as the moment of Passover and the Day of Atonement. They're very solemn assemblies that require deep reflection and even, I would say, contrition of heart, okay? It is a time to remember and reflect on all of the times when the Most High revealed himself as mighty and strong, loving and holy. And this day of Hanukkah is one, this second day of Hanukkah is one which we definitely reflect on the might, and the majesty, and the power, and even the intervention of the Most High in history as relates to favoring the weak, and favoring the oppressed, and favoring the afflicted, okay? But there were also a lot of things that led up to that. We may talk about that as well. But moed, or moad, also has a root meaning, which is to repeat. And it can mean a signal as appointed beforehand. So these are signals that line up with the blueprint of redemption. That's why I call that the blueprint of redemption, because they mark times in which there are specific places where specific people are to present themselves. So there are things that are to be repeated each time the present appointed time has come. The feasts are signals and signs to help us know what is on the heart of the Most High. The Moedim affirm a covenant relationship with Yah. So when we observe these, they serve as marks, they serve as signs, they serve as affirmations that we are in covenant relationship with the Most High, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They signify life. Most importantly, they signify life. And we'll talk about why that's so important in contradistinction with something that we just had passed in time recently. So yes, these are the most wonderful days of the year for the people of Israel. And I would even say for any who truly desire to serve the mighty one of the Bible. Okay, so these are very important times as relates to that. There's also a word called Chag in Hebrew, which relates to a feast, a Chag, okay? And it is a primitive root word, Chagag, which means to move in a circle. So you can see that as a cyclical occurrence, right? It specifically refers to march in a sacred procession or to make a pilgrimage. And so these are three pilgrimages that take place throughout the year with Israel. You have the feast of Pesach, which is Matzot, also unleavened bread. You have the feast of Shavuot, the feast of Pentecost, which is 50 days after the feast of unleavened bread. And then you have the feast of Sukkot, or Tabernacles, which also is the third pilgrimage feast that takes place in the year. And these are yearly observances. But also has the meaning of to observe a festival, by implication, also to be giddy, to be joyous, to be happy, and to celebrate, dance, to keep hold a solemn feast, to reel to and fro. Okay? And so these are all of the meanings in the Hebrew tongue of what a holy day is all about. Not a holiday, but a holy day, because what makes it holy is that these days are set apart to the Creator, to the Most High. Okay? As just opposed to any types of things. But what I want to do at this particular time is just take a moment to look at some traditional American holidays and what their origins are. It's so important to know the roots of things. If we don't understand the root, the seed of something, I would even say, the seed, the inception of it, how can you understand the outgrowth? Even though there may be some conventional changes that we brought or some commercialization that is associated with it, but when we look at the seed of the matter, then we can really understand what everything is all about. And how the Roman Catholic Church adopted these particular holidays in their attempt to assimilate people. They weren't trying to completely just bash people's heads to the point where we're going to just eliminate everyone. They assimilated, or what you call syncretized, the pagan religions with the faith that they were seeking to politically espouse to expand the kingdom, or their empire, if you will. But let's start with the most recent one that just took place. This is, of course, the festival of Thanksgiving. Okay, this is an article from Arcane Alchemy. I'm doing a little historic research on what Thanksgiving is about. In America, the author says, it's believed that the first Thanksgiving took place in 1621. That's typically when it started. But this was not the first time people gathered to give thanks for the autumn harvest. In fact, people have been celebrating the harvest for millennia. And the American Thanksgiving meal is just a modern incarnation reflecting these ancient celebrations of autumn abundance. Most of the modern holidays, like Christmas and Easter, are a combination of pagan and Christian traditions. Very important to note. Thanksgiving, on the other hand, doesn't have as much of a Christian influence. So let's be clear. Like, if we are who we say we are, and we're observing these things, we have to understand what it's connected to, who it's connected to, what is it pointing to, what does it point back to, right? So again, Thanksgiving does not have much of a Christian influence, the author writes. While Thanksgiving is not tied to any one specific religion, its traditions are quite similar to a number of ancient pagan harvest celebrations. She goes on to say, in Rome, for example, they celebrated the holiday of Sorelia, which honored the harvest goddess of grain called Ceres. And I believe Ceres is on the Capitol building in Jefferson City, Missouri. The goddess that is on the Capitol building in Jefferson City, Missouri, is the goddess Ceres. Okay. These are around 100 different harvest gods and goddesses from Greek and Roman culture, so it's clear that celebrating the harvest season was a key feature of the Greeks and Roman spiritual beliefs. And keep in mind, the United States of America is just a baby Rome. When you look at Capitol Hill and you take that in juxtaposition to Capitolina Hill in the Vatican, they are mirror reflections of each other. America is not a democracy, it's a republic. Well, Rome was also a republic. You have the fasces on the wall in the House of Representatives. Well, the fasces was a sign that was also there with Rome. The eagle is also the national bird of Rome. Well, the eagle is also the bird of the United States, but the eagle was also the bird of the Grecians. The eagle was also the bird of the Persians. The eagle was also the bird of the Babylonians, a bird of prey. Very interesting to note historically, because there's a connection there. That's what we have to see. What is the connection? Who does it connect to? Okay. Continuing. Harvest celebrations were also vitally important during Celtic and Anglo-Saxon pagan times. In Britain, these traditions evolved into a holiday called Harvest Home. Historically, the date of Harvest Home differed each year as it was celebrated when all of the autumn crops were finally harvested. The final cartload of food was paraded through the town, and a big harvest supper was celebrated among the villagers. Apparently, these harvest suppers started to get a bit out of hand, and in 1867 were described as unrestrained riot and excess. In addition to Harvest Home, a separate religious holiday called the Days of Thanksgiving were practiced in the Church of England, in which people set aside one religious day of their choosing to give thanks to God. We get the name Thanksgiving from this Christian tradition, while the feasting commonly associated with Thanksgiving largely derives from the Harvest Home celebrations. Luckily for Americans, the Harvest Thanksgiving celebrations were never commandeered by the church, and as such, they remain pretty pagan to this day. So this is something that we got to wrestle with. If we are identifying ourselves as people of the book, we got to wrestle with this stuff. What does the scriptures command us to do as the word of the king coming down to his people, right? Or are we in league with another king in their edicts, in their words, in their celebrations? So these are the things we have to think about. But of course, coming up, we have the festival of Christmas. This comes to us from AccuTeach.com. There's a website called AccuTeach.com, and it goes into some background of what Christmas is about. Undoubtedly, the worldwide celebration of Christmas today can be traced back to European domination of the world. That's very, very poignant to make that statement. European domination of the world is where Christmas can be traced back to. In fact, there's an author, peace be upon him, by the name of Ishakamutsa Barashango, who talks about the genocide of European holidays. Many European holidays were, just like Thanksgiving, were based on genocides of indigenous people. You can't argue that against it. You cannot argue against that. And this is why the celebrations of the scriptures, which are espousing life, are so much more important for us to understand if we are to identify with that book and the faith that is being expressed and communicated through that book. It's important to understand that, because the European domination was one that did cause a lot of bloodshed to take place. Okay. So again, the worldwide celebration of Christmas today can be traced back to European domination of the world. Throughout Europe, various forms of similar winter solstice celebrations, the SUN, were held. In Greece, there was celebration held to honor Dionysus. Okay. Excuse me. This is also known as Bacchus. He was the god of revelry and drunkenness. This god was identical to the Roman god Bacchus. Bacchus was the child of Jupiter, or in Greek, Zeus. According to Roman myths, Dionysus, the god of wine, grape harvest, and included parties, festivals, wild celebrations, madness, orgies, chaos, drunkenness, ecstasy, and fertility. And this is why you see these things even today. December 25 marks his birthday, Dionysus' birthday. It doesn't mark the birthday of who the world calls Jesus Christ. It marks the birthday of Dionysus, or Bacchus. Okay, this is history that you just got to look up and research for yourself. This feast lasted for 12 days. On the first day of Christmas, my true love, okay? 12 days of Christmas, right? This is where this all has its roots and its origin from. These days of wild celebrations and excess reveling was called a bacchanalia. The days were marked with great feasts that included parades of naked women and public sex. The celebration has left footprints around the world in the form of carnival, bacchanal, or bacchanalia, and Mardi Gras. In Finland, they had the KUAW festival. They worshiped the sun goddess of fertility and sanity, which her name was Bewe. The pagan god is sometimes shown as a male figure. At the winter solstice, white animals, particularly white reindeer, were sacrificed to Bewe. They also thought or think that Bewe rides a sleigh made of reindeer bones and was pulled by white reindeer. And so this is where you get the tradition of Santa Claus from, who has a counterpart called Krampus for those children who weren't so nice or who weren't so good during the year, that he went and wrapped them up in chains and beat them with sticks and actually ate the children. He was a demon. That was Santa Claus's counterpart. But Santa Claus goes all the way back to the Norse god Odin, but you can even trace it back further to the Babylonian god, man, deified god, by the name of Nimrod. So when we get these things and we put them all together, we got to understand what idolatry is being promoted and who is participating in this idolatry, and how it does not please the creator of heaven, earth, sea, and all that is in them. And that's why I bring this, because, we want to, again, redefine our reality and reshape our narrative so that we can live in spirit and truth culturally as a people who have lost our culture, and bring it back to our culture, because the things that we're observing have nothing culturally to do with us historically. And it's so important for us to identify with our culture as a people of African heritage, which does include the nation of Israel. Okay, Israel is Afro-Asiatic land. It's just on the northern border of Egypt, and it's on the tectonic plate of Africa. So let's keep this moving. Let's go now to New Year's Day. So New Year's Day, which follows Christmas, or Saturnalia, if you will. It says, over the centuries, the calendar fell out of sync with the sun. And in 46 BC, the Emperor Julius Caesar decided to solve the problem by consulting with the most prominent astronomers and mathematicians of his time. He introduced the Julian calendar. This is before the Gregorian calendar. The Julian calendar, which closely resembles the more modern Gregorian calendar that most countries around the world use today. As part of his reform, Caesar instituted January 1 as the first day of the year, partly to honor the month's namesake, Janus, the Roman god of beginnings, whose two faces allowed him to look back into the past and forward into the future. Now, if you think about it, though, what's new in creation on earth, what's new in nature, January 1? Nothing. Everything is, in fact, dormant. Some would even call it dead. The trees are dead. There's no leaves on the trees. There's no grass to be shown. And this is pretty much around the world. And so this is why April Fool's Day comes about in the month of April, because that is when the new year truly is. But the fools who did not follow the Julian calendar were ridiculed for keeping that as the new year. And that's why they call that April Fool's Day, because you thought that the world is now following that old calendar. No, we're following this new calendar, and so you're a fool for following the old calendar. So Romans celebrated by offering sacrifices to Janus, exchanging gifts with one another, decorating their homes with laurel branches, and attending raucous parties. In medieval Europe, Christian leaders temporarily replaced January 1 as the first of the year with days carrying more religious significance, such as December 25th, which is the birth of Dionysus, and March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation. And Pope Gregory XIII reestablished January 1 as New Year's Day in 1582. That comes to us from history.com. Very important. New Year's Day dedicated to the god Janus. Thanksgiving is just a pagan festival of the harvest, particularly dedicated to the god Ceres. Christmas is dedication to Dionysus at its root, not what is being done today, but at its root. And then you have the next holiday after New Year's, which is Valentine's Day. You can't say that's bad. It's all about love. Well, what kind of love was it to the Romans? What is the meaning of the heart symbol? Because that's what Valentine's Day is all about, your heart, right? It is the symbol of debauchery, derived from the name of the deity Bacchus, again, who is Dionysus. It is Bacchus' symbol meaning orgy. It means an orgy. It is now promoted in association with Valentine's Day. The Greek deity of wine and debauchery was Dionysus. The Roman culture called him Bacchus because that is who has ruled the world today. That's the fourth beast. That's what we read of in Daniel. When we go back, this fourth beast shall think to change appointed times and law. Okay, so he's instituted these holidays as law that you better be observing. And if you don't, well, what's wrong with you? You a Jehovah's Witness or something? That's what people ask you. That's what I get asked a lot. But it's about culture. What culture are you observing? The heart is the image of an ivy leaf worn by Bacchus or Dionysus during his feasting and orgies. He was honored for the grape harvest, winemaking and wine, fertility, theater, and drunkenness. The name Bacchus is the source of the word debauchery. Orgiastic love is represented by the penetrating arrow, the occult images of the male and female depicted as other objects. So those are all what we call occult images. It's symbology. When you see a heart shape with an arrow through it, you're really seeing the symbol for orgy. And to Yah, it is debauchery, right? For the name Bacchus, from the name Bacchus, and the highest level of fornication rubbed into his face. People simply don't realize what they are training their children to perform. An archaeological discovery was made at the site of the ancient city of Ephesus. It was a sign indicating the directions to a brothel and depicted three symbols: a woman, a heart, and a foot. Basically, it said, "This walk this way for sex." This is from a book called Fossilized Customs that just gives us a snippet, a synopsis of what these days are really about at their root and in their seed. Because we got to understand these things if we truly desire to serve the Most High in spirit and truth. And this is why I'm here to present critical thought about these matters so that we can understand the history of this stuff. We got to uncover these things, unearth it. That's why this book, Fossilized Customs, which was one of the first books that really cracked my head to the white meat about understanding many of the traditions that we've inherited and other traditions that we've forsaken that actually lead us to the path and the blueprint of redemption. Because what these other traditions are leading us to, and these are the views that I'm expressing. This is not the view of KUAW anyone, but this is what Shifting Paradigms is presenting, right? They lead to the path of perdition because it is idolatry. It is outright idolatrous. And of course, Easter. Okay? Interesting word, very interesting word. Ishtar, Easter, Ostre, right? Those are very interesting names. So you say the word Easter is in my King James Version of the Bible, the author writes, from Fossilized Customs as well. Translations are not inspired and errors exist by the tens of thousands in many translations. The word in the Greek that underlies the word Easter in the KJV is Pascha, which is from the Hebrew word Pesach, and that means Passover. But of course, the translators, using William Shakespeare and some other translators decided to substitute that word, just like they substituted the name of the Messiah, Joshua. Messias was what it should be in our English. Joshua Messias. That is the Greek and Anglo pronunciation of it. But they chose to substitute Pesach or Pascha with Easter. And it's mistranslated 28 times in the quote-unquote New Testament. All scholars admit that this is an error in translation, and it only appears once in Acts 12:4. Verse 3 is discussing matzot, or unleavened bread. Luke, who wrote almost 40% of the Messianic writings, didn't put it there as Easter. The KJV is the only one with this error. Some translators corrected it, and all others. There was a previous English translation made by the Catholic priest John Wycliffe during the 14th century. Wycliffe's influences came from the Latin Vulgate, and in his day the word Esther, E-S-T-E-R, and Pascha were thought to be synonyms for the same thing. Martin Luther's version used the word Oster, O-S-T-E-R. These men had no idea Ostara, Esther, Ishtar, Ostre, and so on were references to the Earth Mother, adopted from former worship of the host of heaven. Pagan religions through time paralleled each other, carrying the sun, earth, mother, and child model from Babylon to Media, Persia, Phoenicia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, and even the Celtics. The Medes, the Persians, cooked the mythology into Zoroastrianism, producing the magician priests called the Magi. They worshipped Ahura Mazda, Haoma, and Ormazd as their trinity. Okay, the Greeks, Zeus was their sun deity, whose mother was Lydia, shown riding a swan. The Britannica Encyclopedia of 1934 states that Easter, or Ostara or Estre, was the goddess of spring in the religion of the ancient Angles and Saxons. This was an Anglo-Saxon goddess, Easter, an Anglo-Saxon goddess, having nothing to do with the scriptures. Every April, a festival was celebrated in her honor. With the beginnings of Christianity, the old gods were put aside. From then on, the festival was celebrated in honor of the resurrection of the Messiah, but was still known as Easter after the old goddess. And this too comes to us from fossilized customs. Very, very insightful and interesting. And so as we wind up the American observances, we wind up with some would consider their favorite, Halloween. But Halloween is a holiday celebrated each year on October 31. And Halloween 2021 will occur, it occurred on Sunday, October 31st. The tradition originated with the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. It's spelled S-A-M-H-A-I-N, but it's pronounced Samhain. When people would light bonfires, they use the word bonfires to make it kind of sanitized for our day and time, but they were lighting bonfires. They actually took the bones of human sacrifices and lit them on fire, and they would wear costumes to ward off ghosts. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1 as a time to honor All Saints. Soon, All Saints' Day incorporated some of the traditions of Samhain. The evening before was known as All Hallows' Eve, and later, Halloween. Some historians trace the origin of Halloween back to the ancient Christian tradition of celebrating the lives of Christian martyrs on the anniversaries of their deaths. When Pope Boniface IV reconsecrated the Pantheon in Rome, the Roman Pantheon, he rededicated it to the Christian church, bringing something idolatrous into the faith that they called of the Most High, and the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But when he reconsecrated the Pantheon in Rome on May 13th, 609 of the current era, renaming it the Church of St. Mary and the Martyrs, he established that anniversary as a day of celebratory remembrance for all of the church's martyrs. Pope Gregory III later changed the date of remembrance to November 1, when he decided or dedicated a chapel in St. Peter's Basilica to All Saints. November 1 became All Saints' Day, otherwise known as All Hallows' Day. The night before, became All Hallows Eve or Halloween, being a colloquial contraction of that phrase. While Halloween began as a localized celebration, Pope Gregory IV extended its observance to all of Christendom in the 9th century. This is what you call syncretism, merging idolatrous pagan practices with the faith of the Bible. And that's something that is not permitted in Scripture. The policy of the Catholic Church was to adapt the customs of an indigenous population, which are called pagan practices, and give them new meanings more appropriate to controlling them or steering them toward their priests rather than the pagan priests. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church would show salvation to a population by using that population's own former pagan framework. It's easier to do that as opposed to completely reacculturate someone to a new way of life. But that's what's called by the Most High to do, is to deny yourself, to pick up the stake and follow the Most High's Son in spirit and truth. That's what that rebirth is all about. The maxim, the end justifies the means, allowed behavior of all sorts to be acceptable. And this too comes from fossilized customs. So again, when we look at just these particular American national holidays, I didn't really touch Mother's Day, Father's Day, I didn't touch President's Day, I didn't touch MLK Day, but all of these days really have their roots in honoring things that are not sanctioned by the Most High according to Scripture. And it does sound very, what's the word I want to say, dogmatic. It may sound very strict, but we know that the path to life is narrow. It says this, the path to life is narrow and afflicted. And we know that the Most High in Scripture is a jealous Elohim and does not desire to give his esteem or honor or glory to any other. It says this in Scripture. And I know it sounds preachy, but these are things that I present in order for us to just really consider, for those who do desire to walk and live a biblical life, to understand what is required to live a biblical life. And I say this even to myself because my walk ain't perfect. You know what I'm saying? I still struggle with myself every day. But as we are in the festival of Hanukkah, right now, the festival of rededication, the festival of lights, what we're being called to do, for those of us in observance of this, is to shine the light in the dark areas of our life. It's to overcome our pride and our ego, to overcome the arrogance that we have, to overcome the unclean and impure ways that we have, and to overcome the rebelliousness that we have in our spirit, in our hearts, in our lives, so that we can present ourselves to the Most High as unblemished creatures, as living offerings, as the Scriptures say, holy and acceptable. And this is what we desire to do for those of us who are seeking to serve the Father in spirit and truth. And so, what I want to do now is take a moment to look at the blueprint of salvation, or the blueprint of redemption. We just went over the path of perdition for the most part, okay? And again, Leviticus 23, it captures pretty much all of the appointed times of the Most High. Oh, Baba G, it says the live video has ended on Facebook.
Oh, yeah, I got started back up. We're having fun.
It's them gremlins again. The gremlins are busy.
They haven't left.
Okay, I think we're going. I see it.
Yeah, it's been
off and on.
Yeah, it buffers. It's not enough signal.
Oh, okay.
Because Texas saying, YouTube saying the same thing.
Okay. Well, we just keep rocking.
I think we must have low signal out there or something, because it did that with me.
All right. Well, we shall proceed and continue to rock the mic. This is B. Michael here with Shifting Paradigms with KUAW at the W.B. Du Bois Learning Center. This is brought to you by the Black Family Technology Awareness Association. And we're talking about Holy Day Paradigmatics today here on Shifting Paradigms with B. Michael. I'm your host. And we're just going over, understanding time, understanding whose time we're on, understanding what we're observing, what are the origin of these things that we're engaging in. Some things we think have, an innocent veneer to it, but beneath it, it is a bunch of darkness. And this is why I've been pretty much, inspired to share this with you all, particularly during the Festival of Hanukkah, which is a very powerful holiday as relates to Israel overcoming the first Western incursion of imperialism. This is the first Western imperial dominant incursion of colonialism on African peoples. And so when we look back at this history, and we can see how Israel successfully overcame the Greco empire under the Seleucids, which was led by Antiochus Epiphanes, and this is all historically documented. You can look this up. This was something that African people can celebrate. This is definitely something worthwhile celebrating as an African, you know, that we can get inspired by as relates to understanding how, again, the few overcame the many, and how the weak overcame the strong, and how the pure of heart overcame the corrupt, and how the innocent overcame the guilty. So these are things that we can call upon and hearken on for inspiration, and use the energy that is surrounding this day to garner up our fortification so that we can continue walking on the path for our resurrection and for our greatness, and to be who the Most High has purposed us to be, and to bring forth this kingdom of heaven on earth. This is what we're here for. And these appointed times, Hanukkah, again, the 8-day festival of light, is a great time to harness light within yourself, and then to project that light into the world. It's a great time for that, especially in this season of darkness. We look outside, there's more hours of dark than there are hours of light. And so what better time to observe a festival of light during a time of great darkness? And this is what Hanukkah is teaching us. So this is the 9th month. It's so interesting, just taking these months and how utterly influenced we are by Greco-Roman culture. Janus, the god of the two faces, right? The past and the future. February was the god of, I can't remember what that was. It's a god as well, though. Mars, the god of March, right? Woden, what's called the April. Aprilis was a goddess as well. Maya, the goddess of earth. Juno was a god of the moon. Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, right? These are all deified, like, idols that the Western world has introduced to the whole world, which we follow, hook, line, and sinker. But the only months that do truly have their true mark, September, which is supposed to be the 7th month, is actually the 9th month, because sept prefix is 7, oct is 8, but October is the 10th month. November, which is a geometric word for 9, is the 9th month, but here we are on the 11th month. In December, which is supposed to be the 10th month, Deci, right? A decagon is 10-sided, but that's the 12th month. So what's going on? Where are we in time? Whose time are we on? So these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves critically and think, like, what's going on? What is really going on? Even the days of the week, right? Sunday, the day of the sun. This is what Rome worshiped. They worshiped Mithra, the god of the sun, Sol Invictus. They also called it Christos Helios. So the word Christ is not unique to the one that Israel was sent as a Messiah, as a Mashiach. There was already a god that Rome worshiped called Christos. His name was Christos Helios. Okay? Sunday, first day of the week. Monday, the day of the moon. There were lunar worshipers as well. Tuesday, that's Fat 2, that's also Mars, the day of Mars. Wednesday is Odin's day. Thursday is Thor's day. Friday is Freya, which is Odin's wife and Thor's mother. And Saturn is their main god, which is called Saturday. And so we got to really examine these things and think about, man, we are perforated with idolatry, because we're calling on all these different gods' names. And yes, it's something that is very conventional and easy for us to deal with. But when we really think about what the scripture commands the people of the kingdom to do, it says don't even call on these gods' names anymore. Don't even make mention of them. That's in Exodus 23 and verse 13. Don't even mention these other deities' names. But here we are, inundated. Even the shoe, Nike, is the god of victory. Like, what can we do to escape this stuff? Because idolatry is everywhere. And idolaters have no love from the Most High. It's just be like Plain and simple. That's punishable by death when you look at what Scripture commands. But of course, that kingdom is not enforced. We have to bring that back. It's our fault that the kingdom isn't enforced. We're waiting on something that we have to do. But let's take a look at this real quick. We got a couple minutes left, several minutes left. So again, Leviticus 23 captures the blueprint of salvation, the blueprint of redemption for all of Israel. There's a spring festival and there's a fall festival. The spring festivals deal with what you call the barley harvest. The barley harvest deals with the resurrection of souls when you really deal with the mystery of what this is talking about. And the resurrection of souls of the barley has already taken place. Matthew 27 verse 52 talks about when Yahushua rose from the dead, the graves were, and many of the saints who were asleep rose from their grave. It says that in Matthew 27. That's the barley harvest. Those are the first fruits spoken of in Revelation 14, the 144,000 in Revelation 14, which are different than the Revelation 7 harvest of the souls who come through the Great Tribulation, which is the wheat harvest. Okay? But the spring festivals, I'm just going to kind of touch on these and wrap this up. You have Pesach. Pesach is a moment. Pesach is the twilight hour when the lamb was offered up. It commemorates the deliverance of Israel from Egypt, and it also commemorates the offering of Yahushua, the Messiah, on Golgotha. He has the true Passover lamb. That was the fulfillment of Passover, okay? That was the fulfillment of Passover. That is the initial moment of a 7-day festival that leads to what is called Hag Matzot, which is also called the Festival of Unleavened Bread. The Festival of Unleavened Bread was the bread that was made in Israel's haste to depart from Egypt. And their departure required them to not put leaven in the bread. They didn't have time for that bread to rise. They just had to make unleavened bread. But what that symbolizes for us, we know a little leaven leavens a whole bunch. That is sin. That is our waywardness. That's our rebelliousness. That's pride, right? That's lust. That's anything that is contrary to a life of purity and set apartness, or what we know as holiness. And so when we remove all that leaven, that means we're living a blameless, spotless, sin-free life. Okay, and that's why the Son of Man was manifested to destroy the works of the devil and to overcome sin. And that's why he rose from the grave, because there was no sin in his life, and therefore the law of sin and death did not apply to him. He overcame death because he overcame sin. And that's what the Festival of Unleavened Bread is all about. After the Festival of Unleavened Bread, 3 days into it, you have the Festival of First Fruits, which is called Yom HaBikarim, the Day of First Fruits. This is the offering of the fruits to the temple of the harvest, but this is also the Day of Resurrection. Okay? 3 days into that, you have Yom HaBikarim, which is the Day of Resurrection. Okay, that's when all the fruit is presented to the temple. The harvest is presented to the temple, to the Father, so to speak, to the Master, and shown as a wave offering to let them know that the harvest has come in. This is why the Messiah speaks about this harvest. You know, the harvest is right, but the workers are few. And so Matthew 13 talks about it in very big detail. So again, you have Pesach, which is a moment. Unleavened Bread, which is a 7-day festival, in which the third day of that 7 days is called Yom